It's the racing event that stops the world in its tracks. 600 million people watch live on television. 40 horses and jockeys line up to race across the famous fences, including Becher's Brook, Canal Turn, Valentine's and the very famous Chair. In this special Grand National edition of In the Zone, we're going to be finding out the history of the great race, plus meeting Joe Nordoff from Timeform and Betfair and Ron Robinson from postracing.net to discuss the big race. Stay tuned. In the build-up to the Grand National, there is real buzz of excitement across the country. The 4.5-mile contest is the toughest in the world. It is sure to be a spectacular display of sporting endeavour as the world's best runners and riders convene for one of the most challenging and thrilling events in the sporting calendar. Over the years, horses such as Golden Miller, Reynoldstown and of course the legendary Red Rum have all triumphed and ridden themselves into history. You may think you know your history on the Grand National. However, we've been down to Aintree to speak to course historian Jane Clarke on the history of the race and just what it means to our city.
I'm Jane Clarke and I'm the historian stroke curator at Aintree. I've been enraptured by the Grand National since I was 7 years old, when back in London, where I live and was living at the time, I saw the Grand National in 1962 on a black and white, very grainy TV screen, and it just captured my heart. And I've been watching it ever since. Since 1970s, I've been coming up to the race itself. And it was just like love at first sight. And my parents and my family had no connection with racing at all. They couldn't understand why this child kept tipping up the sofa every Grand National day and pretending it was a horse and putting a pretend saddle and homemade stirrups on it and riding all the Aintree fences while she watched it on this black and white TV. But since then I've collected all the news cuttings that I can muster about the Grand National. As I say, I've been coming up for years and years, made many friends in Liverpool. I love the place and I love the people. I used to come up as a race girl in the sort of 70s, 80s. Then in the 90s I started pestering the officials at Aintree that they should open a visitor centre or a museum because they had such a wonderful piece of English tradition here in the Grand National. Eventually they listened to me and they made me the curator of the museum. I wrote over 300 letters just to people I knew whose families had had Grand National winners in the past. And I got a wonderful response. They were very glad to either loan things or give us artifacts that were connected with the race and with winners of the past. And the museum opened in 1999. The ribbon was cut by Ginger McCain, Red Rum's trainer. And from those days, it's gone from strength to strength. I'm still collecting pieces even today. The museum is not a dedicated one, so to speak. We've got a lot of the artifacts here in the old weighing room at Aintree, and we've got other artifacts spread all over the course in various rooms and restaurants which the public can see on race days. It's my dream that we get a dedicated museum here one day, so I'm working towards that. I'm also the historian here at Aintree, which I do from my base down south. If they get any questions on the internet, i.e. my grandfather rode in a Grand National in the 1930s, but I don't know the name of the horse or the colours he wore, they pass that on to me, and I can normally find out the answer from my vast collection of record books. Basically, I'd do anything that Aintree asked me because I'm so passionate about the race, and when I was growing up I didn't even dream of setting foot on the course itself, let alone working for them, so it's still a thrill for me, even at my advanced age, and it's still a pleasure to work at what I think is the greatest racecourse in the world, which has the greatest steeplechase in the world run here. I think one of the most important things about the Grand National is how important it is to Liverpool as a city. It's thought of as Liverpool's race, and the people in Liverpool are justly proud of this wonderful tradition, which has been going on since 1839. Not many sporting events of this magnitude have been going that long, and not many have a TV audience of over 600 million every year, making it sort of second only to the World Cup in popularity. It is a wonderful piece, as I say, of English tradition, of English sporting heritage, something we need to preserve, and it has a unique character. Probably the best thing about it from my point of view, it's its unpredictability. You can never say who's going to win the Grand National. However much you study the form, however much you know about racing, there's always a surprise, there's always a fairy tale connected with the Grand National. You've got to only look at the history and see it's littered with fairy tales like Red Rum, Foinaven, Aldernete. There have been triumphs and disasters. It always wins through, if you like, the Grand National. It's rather like life. I think it has its triumphs, its tragedies, its wonderful happiness and the disappointment of the losers. But everything comes out in the end right, and I think it's very emotional as well. Well, it's always been recognised that the first Grand National run at Aintree was in 1839, and that's probably because it had a horse with a wonderfully prophetic name who won it, and that was Lottery. You couldn't get anything better, could you? Because it's the biggest game of chance in the whole of sport. But there are people, historians, who've done a lot of research into this, and they say that the first Grand National was perhaps run at Aintree in 1836. Well, we're standing in the wonderful atmosphere of the old weighing room, which today is part of our museum, and it's known as the Winner's Bar. You can also get a drink here on race days. Now, it's still got that wonderful atmosphere that must have prevailed for hundreds of years when the jockeys changed here before they went out to tackle those 30 formidable fences of the Grand National course. You can still feel, some people tell me, the hairs on the back of your neck standing up when you come into this room, and I absolutely agree with them. Right, we're at another interesting peg now. That was where Bob Champion got his clothes on ready to go and ride Aldernete in the 1981 Grand National. Now that is one of the most romantic fairy tales that you can get, because 18 months before, the horse was a wreck. In fact, they thought they were going to have to put him down because he'd got such a bad leg injury. Bob Champion, on the other hand, had just discovered that he'd got testicular cancer, and his future looked very bleak indeed. But as all Grand National stories go, they both overcame the adversity and came back to a storming win in 1981, which really pulled at the heartstrings. And they even made a film afterwards called Champions. And you can see here some shots from that film, which starred John Hurt. And they filmed it all here at Aintree, and they used the very evocative music from that film to start BBC's coverage of the race for many, many years. It always sends tingles up your spine when you hear that theme. Well, here we have one of my pride and joy cases, a collection of silks, which I've collected all myself, I must admit, brought all the way to Aintree at various times in my Ford Fiesta. And pride of place goes to these black and white silks with the red cap. Now they were carried by Manifesto when he won the Grand National in 1897 and 1899. He was like the Red Rum of those years because he actually made 8 appearances in the Grand National at Aintree, so was quite a hero and quite an Aintree specialist. And these silks were discovered about 10 or 15 years ago by a family who had a holiday home down in Sussex. They found these silks in the loft with a huge, beautiful silver cup, and that had been won by Manifesto, and the silks were in perfect, pristine condition. They're handmade, hand-sewn, nothing wrong with them at all. They've come to Aintree. Again, the family thought that's where they belonged, and it was a real find. I was thrilled to discover those. We're standing now at the final resting place of Aintree's greatest hero, Red Rum. This is his grave, just adjacent to the winning post here at Aintree, and he's even buried with his head facing the winning post. In 1973, the Tophams, who'd run Aintree for many years, gave it up, and the course was in danger of being sold as property development. The whole future of the place was in doubt. Crowds stayed away, it was very down at heel, and there was just no interest in the Grand National. Every year we were told this would probably be the last race. In 1973, this local horse came up and he suddenly sped past the tiring Crisp on the run-in 1973 under Brian Fletcher and won the Grand National. That was pretty good, but better was to come the next year when again, ridden by Brian Fletcher, Red Rum won again, 2 years running. Could he do it 3 times, they said? Well, he almost did it in 1975. He was second, just beaten by Lescargo, and the following year, 1976, just beaten by Lescargo. But there was still life in him, and in 1977, his famous victory under Tommy Stack was a record breaker in every sense. 3 wins, 2 seconds in 5 runs in the Grand National, a record that will never ever be beaten, I'm sure. And I think it's definitely the right place for Red Rum, and hopefully he'll be the guardian of the Grand National for its foreseeable future. Danger beckons unto daring, and the colours wait for wearing, while fame proffers gifts for sharing, and Dame Fortune plans the falls. Lo, the spirit of endeavour burns in England's hearts forever. Aintree calls.
So who will win the 2015 Grand National? It's the question we're all asking, and without the aid of a time machine, we're all forced to study the form, statistics and trends to help us find the winner of the race. However, to make all that easier for you, our racing correspondent Will Rooney was joined in our studio by Joe Nordoff from Timeform and Betfair and Ron Robinson from postracing.net to filter through the runners and riders.
Joe, Ron, welcome to the Grand National special on In the Zone. First, we're going to talk about Shut the Front Door, AP McCoy's last Grand National. Joe, has it got a chance, or is it going to be going off at too short for price?
Well, I think he's got an outstanding chance of winning. I think John Joe O'Neill's obviously kept the horse really fresh for this race. He's had it in mind for a long time, probably since they won the Irish Grand National last year. Is he going to be too short was the main question. I think that is the $1 million question, and I think he is likely to be too short on the day. For all, he's got an outstanding chance.
Ron, what price do you think Shut the Front Door might go off at?
I can see it going around about 7-2. Be one of the shortest price favourites for many a year. Once the housewives get stuck in on Saturday morning, I think the 7-1 that's around about at the moment, that'll be long gone. If you fancy it, I'd get getting on now.
Yeah, of course, AP, he has got a bit of a headache still because the Gordon Elliott train Cause of Causes, owned by JP McManus, of course, won very well at Cheltenham. Ron, would you back Cause of Causes?
No, I wouldn't. The main reason I'd not be on that horse is because it's a 7-year-old. And the last 7-year-old to win the Grand National was a horse called Bogscar in 1940. So history's not exactly on the side of a 7-year-old. I think also what you'll find is that was ridden by what was basically a professional in an amateur riders race. Jamie Cogg's just different class. I think AP's on the right horse.
Yeah. We'll move on to last year's winner in the race, Pinot de Rey. Joe, it's been raised £8 in the weight since last year. Can he win back-to-back nationals since Red Run?
Well, I certainly wouldn't discount the horse initially, but he definitely came into the race last year in a much better vein of form. This year he's obviously been campaigned like many of the field around the national, so we're not likely to see the best of him over hurdles. But last year he did run a really good race in the Pertemps qualifier at Cheltenham, and this year was essentially a lacklustre effort in comparison to that. But obviously horses come back regularly, so you wouldn't be necessarily discounting him for all that. He won't be on my shortlist.
Ron, last year's second goes again, Balthazar King.
He's been trained for the race, no doubt about that. Done most of its recent winning though over the cross-country courses. That slightly puts me off. Not as much as the Dickie Johnson's record. I think he's the losing most top jockey riding in the national this weekend. I think he's ridden 17 times in it now. He's managed second place twice. There'd be a couple more I fancy a bit more strongly than that one, to be honest with you. Although Philip Hobbs will have it there spot on for the day.
Joe, would Balthazar King's lengthy break put you off, or would you, like Ron, seem it's the best thing for him?
I think overall I'd be pretty keen on the lengthy absence personally. I don't think we could judge him too harshly on the cross-country efforts, given that that's where he's mainly campaigned. And I think anyone who looks at his record for the last 5 or 6 seasons when we've actually seen him, I think he's won first time out in about 4 of them, certainly after an absence. Yeah. So that's definitely a positive with a horse like that coming from such a top stable.
Paul Nicholls has won just about every big Saturday race this year. Can't get any bigger race on a Saturday in the Grand National. Ron, who do you think's his best chance?
Oh, without a doubt, it's Rocky Creek. Again, you've got Union East, who is a 7-year-old, and you've got the same problem that I've got with Cause of Causes, going back to Bogscar in 1940. I just think it's probably a year or possibly 2 years too soon for Union East. I think Rocky Creek will have been campaigned for the race. Last year I had him down as potentially a Gold Cup horse, and I think this season he's been trained with the Grand National in mind. Ran an absolute cracker last year. I think he's as likely a winner as any of this year's race. 5th
in the race last year, Joe. Do you agree, Rocky Creek?
Yeah, I agree in that he's obviously been kept fresh for the races. Hennessy effort had to go down as a disappointment in November, but as we said, he bounced back at Kempton in pretty emphatic style, and he looked the horse well ahead of his handicap mark. I think everyone will agree on that. Yeah. In relation to Union East, I think if we look at his form, speaking literally, giving £5 to Coney Gray and losing, you've actually lost nothing in defeat, because we now know exactly what Coney Gray is. Is Union East for me? Probably not. I think I agree in that. You know, he might need another year on his back, and Rocky Creek would obviously be the Paul Nicholls horse for the National this year. Yeah.
We'll move on to another Cheltenham winner, the Druid's nephew. Won very well at Cheltenham. Since he's moved to the Neil Mulholland Yard, he's looked a different horse, hasn't he, Joe?
He certainly has, yeah. And this wouldn't be the first advert, I don't suppose, for Neil Mulholland's training ability. He's obviously made a fantastic start to his training career. I think the Druid's nephew comes out, obviously I'm at time for him. He comes out top rated on our figures. As I say, he's won that race at Cheltenham, which has got to go down as probably one of the strongest pieces of handicap form in March. Is he well handicapped? I think he's undoubtedly well handicapped. The longer distance promises to suit. He's obviously, I think he's got the services of Aidan Coleman already booked. And on that basis, he's another one that certainly can't be discounted.
The thing that puts me off him, there's 2 things that put me off him. If you look at every time he's won a race, he needs a break before he'll come back and produce that form again. I don't think the break between Cheltenham and Aintree will be enough for him. Another thing that's dead against him is the fact that he's gone and won a race at Cheltenham. You have to go back to Seagram in 91 to find the horse that won at Cheltenham, then followed up at Aintree. And before that, you'd have to go back to 1961. So I work a lot with stats. History means a lot to me when it comes to placing a bet, and I couldn't back him because of that. He was actually my banker bet at Cheltenham this year, but he'd be a lay this year for me.
Lay for you. We'll move on to Many Clouds, this year's Hennessy winner. One of the leading 3-mile chasers, but Ron, is he too high in the weight, do you think?
I don't think it's as much a case of that as he must have had a hell of a hard race in that race at Cheltenham. you've got to go back to Rough Quest to find a horse that ran in the Gold Cup and then went on to win a Grand National. I think the horse is probably over the top for the season. I think he's there more because the owner would like him there rather than the trainer. And like the Druid's nephew, he'd be a lay for me.
We'll move on to Willie Mullins. He's had a fantastic year, but he's got a pretty weak Arsenal coming over for the Grand National, hasn't he, Joe?
He has, yeah. And again, I think in relation to, we're obviously talking now about Ballycasey, who's obviously, he's disappointed, hasn't he? I think when I listened to Ruby Walsh at Cheltenham, prior to that, they asked him if they were going to ride him any differently on that occasion. Ruby Walsh said, no, I'm going to ride him like a Grade 1 horse because we're in a Grade 1 race, which I think he's absolutely spot on about. Yep. But there's definitely stamina concerns arriving ahead of the National. And on that basis, he's another one that wouldn't be on my shortlist for all. An operation like Willie Mullins and Ruby Walsh cannot be discounted.
The thing about that operation is that if you look at the wins with handicappers away from Cheltenham, their last winner of a handicap away from Cheltenham was Hedgeflinter in the Grand National. Whenever he sends a handicapper over, you can lay it to bits. I remember an interview with the owner on television before Cheltenham, and he was saying then that they were very disappointed in how Ballycasey progressed or hadn't progressed. I don't think they'd be coming over with any optimism.
Right, gentlemen, final tips. Have we got anything else we fancy that we haven't mentioned, or are you keen on the ones we've discussed today?
Well, I think we arguably deserve to mention Godsme Judge. Briefly, he's obviously had a disappointing season. His effort over hurdles at Bangor last time was distinctly lacklustre. But he's another horse which has had his whole season and campaign geared around a tilt at the Grand National. And he was pulled up twice before he competed really well and was placed in the Scottish National last year. The better ground's going to help him. He's a bold, prominent racer, which is always going to be necessary in the Grand National. And quickly, I think another one that deserves a mention is Spring Heeled. He was runner-up in the Munster National early on last season behind Double Seven, who obviously done that form no harm by being placed in the National behind Pinot de Rey. He's another horse that promises to be suited by the better ground. Jim Colotti's overall record isn't the most inspiring at the moment, but I can certainly see him performing much better on the day.
Ron, quick final tip.
Sol, definitely an each-way bet. Moved to the Pipe Yard from Joe Hughes. Ran 7th in Aurora's Encore's Grand National in 2013. Ran a cracker at Aintree again last year in the shorter race. Got hampered at the Canal Turn. Made steady ground up. Did well to finish where he finished. He'll have been laid out for this race by David Pipe. Yesterday, sneaked in at the bottom of the weights. I think around 20 to 1. He's a cracking each way bet.
It's all your best bet. Joe?
Yeah, I'd have to say Spring Heeled. I'm really keen on Spring Heeled.
Thanks very much for that, Cheltenham.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
I hope you've enjoyed this special edition of In the Zone. And don't forget, place your bets for the big race. Until next time, stay in the zone.